Would you like me to introduce the paper? So the purpose of this paper is for the council to receive and consider the advice from the board, from the Regenerate Christchurch Board that was received in early December to the Mayor and Minister as representatives of the shareholders of Regenerate Christchurch. As background to this piece of work, early in 2019 through into most of 2019, Regenerate Christchurch was focused on delivery of the Aotearoa Avon River regeneration plan, and they successfully completed that plan, and it's been very well received. Regenerate Christchurch are the only entity under the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act that are able to promote regeneration plans or Section 71s for areas that are red zoned. So as they have with the Aotearoa Avon River corridor, Regenerate Christchurch must be the proponent under the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act. So with the successful completion of the Aotearoa Avon River corridor regeneration plan, we worked with Ivan and the Regenerate Christchurch team to consider what were the necessary, if any, applications under the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act for those other red zone areas across the city, including the Port Hills, South Shore and Brooklands, and we've collaboratively worked together on that advice. The council staff advice is consistent with the advice that is received from Regenerate Christchurch, so we're comfortable with the recommendations of Regenerate Christchurch. And just to summarise those, the council already has in place mechanisms for dealing with the Port Hills issues, and we've used the mechanisms under the Resource Management Act to address those issues. The council has plans in place for South Shore and South New Brighton, and we're comfortable using standard RMA processes for those areas. And for Brooklands, we're in agreement with Regenerate Christchurch that we should do early engagement in the new year. We're simply flagging that there'll be both a process of engagement around potential application of any mechanisms under the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act, but there is also the wider issue of the coastal hazards chapter under the district plan and the planning using adaptive planning processes, and those will start to run into each other over the course of 2020. But we've heard loud and clear the issues raised by Jan this morning, and we're comfortable that we can keep those the engagement issues separate, but the any physical issues in terms of actions that result may well run in together, because we'd want to consider both the long term and the medium term and the short term as we make any decisions.
Thank you for that. Look, is it possible for Ivan Yafeta to come and join us at the table as the Chief Executive of Regenerate Christchurch? I think it might be more helpful to have him able to answer questions directly, because I certainly have a couple of questions as a result of Jan's presentation this morning. Thanks very much, and sorry for the lack of notice. Call you to the table. Your 20 seconds starts now. No, it's not really a mastermind quiz. Look, the thing that's occurred to me is that the Avon Aotearoa River corridor necessarily took the attention of the organisation, because it was such a large land area with many complexities within a significant corridor. Brooklands, I went to Brooklands on the 4th of September. It was the first place I went. It's my first cup of coffee on the day of the first earthquake that changed our city forever. So I've got an emotional attachment to Brooklands, so I do apologise for that. I got it at the volunteer fire station, actually, which the fact that they have a volunteer fire station speaks volumes for the fact that it's a real community. And it was devastated by the red zone decision, which was one of the late decisions. There was no warning. It was an impactful decision. It was a shock in the sense of post-traumatic stress that is the impact on the community like Brooklyn. So, you know, I know this community, and so that's why I feel that we have to be respectful about what happens next. The largest group of Remainers, people who chose not to accept the Crown's offer, exists in Brooklands. And in many respects, leaving it to the end of a necessarily long process was reasonable, given that it poses another set of challenges quite different from the other areas. But that being said, it also means that we have to find a way of communicating with those people and their neighbours who still make up the Brooklands community about what happens next. And, you know, there are a significant number who sit at the border of the green zone and what was red zoned by the Crown. And there are a few that sit within the wider area. And if the solution were to, similar to the Otakaro-Avon River corridor, to find a space where housing could be located on the edge, and some of the boundaries redefined and potentially with higher land levels, that would require a change to the district plan, and it would require a regeneration plan, as I read the legislative framework. But we haven't even had that conversation with the community. So I'm just wondering whether, rather than fold this into a conversation about our, you know, the necessary work that we have to do in terms of the coastal hazards component of the natural hazards chapter of the district plan, could we consider some of those issues in the context of keeping a community together? And then is that something that the council could initiate, or is it something that, and working with the powers of the Regenerate Christchurch to get it underway? Because it does seem to me that building a relationship of trust with those who remain and those who surround is the key first step. And that's why I suggested to Jan a pre-engagement, just to see what the options were and what people's expectations might be, because some of their expectations might be unrealistic, and if they are, then we could deal with them now. And but, you know, so that we could lead gently into the year, so that 2020 becomes a year where they can establish a new vision for the future.
Thank you, Mayor. In responding to the request about whether the powers under the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act might be required for the Brooklands area, one of the first questions that we would need to understand is in order to address what barriers or what issues so that certain outcomes can be achieved. And to the best of my knowledge, between the Council and Regenerate Christchurch, that conversation has yet to occur with the Brooklands community. And I would also say that in terms of any engagement, I agree with Brendan that any engagement would need to be undertaken with care and with respect, and also in a way that helps to manage expectations about what is realistically achievable and within the timeframes. I think that there's an opportunity for engagement with that community, not to predetermine the process or the outcomes, but simply to engage and to listen and to understand from their perspective what the existing issues are for them and what their concerns as well as their thoughts about the future. And it might be that in having that conversation, we can very quickly move to correct any misunderstandings about what is currently possible under the existing planning rules.
Yep.
It will provide an opportunity to provide clarity to the community about of their concerns and issues or priorities which can be addressed under the adaptive planning process that the council will undertake and the timeframes for undertaking that. And where there are other obstacles or opportunities that might be considered under the Act, we would still need to work with the council and other stakeholders to determine whether the use of the powers would be consistent with the purposes of the Act and whether it would be reasonably considered necessary, noting that the council is about to undertake a process which will also help to change the district planning rules for that particular community in a way that will either enable or not enable certain uses to occur.
Except that the red zone, I can't remember, what is it called? Special purpose...
Flatland recovery zone.
Red zone?
A special
recovery
purpose
zone.
flatland
Sorry,
zone.
recovery zone. That prevents... That really leaves people in limbo.
You are correct. It is an interim zone and was intended to be an interim zone. But for those residential properties that are still privately owned, the rule package still enables them to undertake and fulfil the functions and obligations of a residential property owner. And I'll just check that with the council team.
That's correct. So residential and related activities can be carried out under those rules. Whilst it is a temporary zoning, the rules enable continuation of the existing uses there.
So they'd have no trouble selling that on the open market, because that would be really easy to sell something that is a transitional use, where the rules might change.
The ease of sale will be influenced by a range of factors. The district plan rules enable residential activity, but there are other factors that may, including the existing hazard overlays, which may inevitably be of concern to some people.
But the point that I'm making is that while it is that special purpose flatland recovery zone, it's very hard for anyone to treat it like a normal residential property.
And that's the current, you're quite right, that's the current situation, yes.
Certainly that's the view that's been expressed from the small number of property owners that have approached Regenerate Christchurch, is the concern about the interim nature of that zone, not only for the remaining residents in terms of the uncertainty of an interim zone and what may or may not be intended to occur in the future, what impact that may or may not have on the value of their property for them as the current owners, and also what that may or may not mean for any decision that they might make to sell their property at any time in the future whilst it currently has an interim zone in place.
Would you favour an early sort of pre-engagement process, just to establish where people are at?
So consistent with the letter from the Board of Regenerate Christchurch, we would be in favour of early engagement with the community. Just responding to the point that was made by Jan, January is certainly a date that from Jan's perspective she would like to see engagement occurring from. But I'll come back to the point that I made earlier. I think if we are going to engage early, it's still important that we do that with care and with respect. And so we need to work with council to make sure that we do engage appropriately, and also that we're very clear about managing what the purpose of that initial engagement and conversation would be, and how we manage expectations.
Because in a way, I mean, I just think this does need to be handled with some delicacy and caution. I think that the point that Jane made in her presentation, Brendan, was this concern that there would be a process that wouldn't include the community until essentially the end of August, and then here's the 10th anniversary of the earthquake, and that's when the engagement with the community begins. So you'd feel comfortable with starting a pre-engagement in January, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're recommending in point 2 there. So we're more than happy doing this with Regenerate Christchurch. We agree with the advice that's in section 34 of Regen's letter about the proposed purpose of that engagement, so we're more than comfortable with that.
Yeah, it's kind of noting that Council and Regenerate Christchurch staff will continue to define and specify the engagement proposed with the Brooklands community, and will also engage with the Community Board throughout this process. It was the body of the document that that concerned me, because it made it look like it was going to take quite a bit longer to get to the community, and there's no time frame specified in that. I just think that maybe we could note that Council and Regenerate Christchurch staff will enter into a pre-engagement with the Brooklands community to explore what the options are in January. And I think that it might be a good idea to come back to the community board. Yeah, and I mean, I'll flick it over for questions for others, but I'll work through some wording. But would it be possible at the end of January to have some sort of conversation, or you're both looking a bit fretful now? So
well,
even
I think
you,
the point that we've both made is I think it is important just to manage the expectations here, and so we'd need to be clear about the purpose. And if you have something in your head about what we were trying to achieve from engagement or pre-engagement, we'd obviously want to know that. But as Ivan's articulated, and as the letter from the Board of Regenerate Christchurch does say, that what we're proposing is that we do the engagement to understand the aspirations and the issues of the community, and
to understand the aspirations of the community and their expectations. Bearing in mind that those expectations may not be able to be delivered under the current framework.
Yeah, and in particular, whether the potential solution being the Greater Christchurch Act is the right solution for those issues, aspirations and expectations.
No, but it is a listening exercise, yeah. And then I think it's like report back to the community board and have a conversation about where to then. Yeah, so it's a bit of a conversation to create common understanding, because I mean, nobody's had this kind of conversation with Brooklands.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. I mean, I've got history, so I'm being emotional, and I shouldn't be. James, did you have some questions?
Kia ora. Look, Jan was very clear and concise, articulate about her situation and the situation of her community, surrounding community. And I'll try and keep it simple as well. And I think that we need to engage early, and as has been, the word has come around here, that we need to listen to that community. I think that's what they want. I know that's what they want. And it does say in 4.10 in the paper that, and this would be alarming, that they're waiting for that you'd wait for the coastal hazards assessment to be completed by August next year, and then community engagement could begin. You know, I think we need the engagement sooner. Maybe January's too soon for you, but I'd welcome some further form of direction in the motion to ensure that this is. We need to grab this by pick it up by the seat of the pants and do something with this. We've been waiting too long.
Yeah, just to be clear, we're sorry for the confusion if we've created any. The paper both talks about the resolution as it's proposed up there, which is for early engagement first thing in the new year to understand the aspirations and issues with the Brooklands community, and then about the applicability of the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act. The council staff paper also brings to your attention that inevitably, and there may well be some crossover, that we will be engaging broadly across the city, including Banks Peninsula, with coastal communities as part of the adaptive planning using the MFE guidelines, and we've experienced in that, and so I would just hesitate that we seek to rush that second process that hasn't worked out well when we've tried to do that. So we want to work that second process through thoroughly and with a high degree of rigour.
As it should be, but this is another aspect of it, and this is very much about the well-being of the community, and you have to go through the process for the adaptive planning and so on. There's no doubt about that, but can we get in front of this community and listen to them as soon as possible?
Yep, absolutely.
It seems to me that there's a very, very strong overlap, not just a potential overlap in the two pieces of work. And I think that probably the last thing the community need is two different groups of people going in, having the same conversations about future land use and those kind of things, and then potentially coming up with different solutions with the community with those. Yeah. Is there a way to do those two together? Not just one then the other, but we're organisations who work closely with each other and all of those kind of things. It seems like a way that we could have that one conversation with the community, with this, with combined staff or engagement processes. It worries me that we're not further along on our coastal hazards communication and conversation with the community, being that we promised that we would do it differently than what happened the first time, and that takes time, and we don't have a lot of time left now before that's due. So if we were able to do those together rather than doing one and then coming back again and doing it again, that would be really good.
I think I can understand why people would say that, and I agree that it would be ideal, but this is a community that hasn't had any conversations. So I'd rather that the initial conversation were focused on understanding what people's aspirations and expectations are.
But that could be the same conversation for both pieces of work?
No.
Potentially?
Look,
yeah.
It's more open-ended than that. This is actually the beginning of a conversation which will inevitably go down two tracks.
Mm-hmm.
You're quite right to say that the two tracks should come together, but at the beginning, it's just there to understand the aspirations and expectations of the community. The community didn't ask to be red zoned. This was a shock.
Completely get that, but it's the same conversation that we're probably going to have around the coastline.
Yes, I know, but
long-term
the
aspirations.
The coastline generally, and
Yeah.
you've heard this in South Shore, you heard it loud and clear. They wanted to deal with the earthquake-related damage first, and then they wanted to deal with coastal hazards. And they didn't want to, so I don't want to muddy the waters. These people are between a hard and a rock place, and yet they've got neither.
Yeah.
So
I think we've got to.
Mayor, if I could suggest that in any community engagement, as you've noted, the first step is to seek to understand and listen to the community. And that will be an ongoing feature of the adaptive planning process. And so that will be an ongoing iterative conversation. What we would seek to achieve in this first preliminary conversation is a very initial understanding of what their goals and aspirations are, so that at the very least we can provide collectively clarity about what the process or what the pathway forward is for each of those. And I think if that's what we sought to achieve in that initial preliminary conversation with the community about listening, then that's something that I would suggest, Mayor, in terms of time framing, that we seek to do as early as possible in the new year and by February at the latest.
No, that's fine. Well, I've changed it to early 2020.
And can we ask them...
as early as possible in 2020.
And can we ask them whether they'd rather do it all at the same time?
No, because this is a first step.
Yeah.
First conversation.
It's a
but
first
as
conversation.
part of that first conversation, say, how would you like to proceed?
No.
No? Okay.
I honestly...
Can I suggest, please, that
Yes.
we don't try and design how the conversation is going to happen in council,
Yep.
and we have a proposition on the table that we'll have an early meeting, which is a proper conversation with the community, to say, what is it that you are looking for, what is it you are desiring, and how do we help achieve that collectively together. Once we've had that conversation and understand that, then we can move forward into the detail of the what.
Yeah. And if there has to be a special meeting of the Coastal Board Community Board called, you know, in the schedule so that you can get this moving, then that would be, that can easily be arranged with the Community Board. So I think as early as possible in 2020 to understand the aspirations and expectations, plural, of the community and report back to the Coastal Board Community Board. We might find that some of the expectations are completely out of the ballpark and can't be delivered. And the sooner that we are able to bring expectations to what is possible, the better. But we won't understand what needs to be done until we have that initial conversation. Yanni?
I just wondered if you think it would be helpful for councillors to go and visit Brooklands, maybe do a bus tour, or
like you did on the day that they got red zone.
Yeah, well, I was going to bring that up.
They were going to be red zone.
So, I mean, there is an irony, of course, that
it's a total irony. The council went out there on the day of the red zoning decision, not knowing that the government was going to red zone them that day, and so they all turned up, had morning tea with the community, and then left on the bus, and the posties turned up and put the red zone letters in people's letterboxes. It was just...
And we also were going to look at other areas that had been red zoned without knowing that that area was going to be red zoned. So, but I just, like, it's been a while and we haven't been out there, you know, in my memory recently. And I just wondered whether, I mean, I hear there's kind of like two sort of things going on in terms of earthquake damage and future planning and hazard assessment. And I did wonder whether it's something that we should, as a council, consider actually going and seeing firsthand, appreciating that the community board will do a lot of the work, hopefully around this. But I personally have found it quite useful when we've been to like South New Brighton, South Shore, and just walked around.
Okay, we'll just leave that until after the initial consultation or the initial pre-engagement has occurred, so that we've got a better understanding of where things are at. But I'm sure that the community board will be happy to invite us out there, you know, if that is going to be helpful. So would someone like to move this resolution?
Can we put a specific date? It was suggested that February was achievable.
February.
Can we put February in there?
No, later than.
Well, no, they're both happy to have as early as possible in or by the end of February. Yeah, they're both happy to have
If we could put
by the end of February.
Yeah. No later than.
But as early as possible in 2020, no later than February.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's that way. It's got a deadline to it.
Thank you.
So would you like to move that?
Yes, I will.
James, seconded by Phil. Sorry. Okay. Yep.
So I appreciate the advice. Obviously, there's a lot of complicated technical work that just couldn't be done in time to use regenerate powers, as my reading of your assessment. I just wondered whether you'd identified any sort of more local, fine-grained issues where you could have a more immediate response. And something that comes to mind, for example, is the skate park, for example, that's proposed to go in. And so whether there's any sort of, I guess, more minor natured specific or very specific local areas that could be addressed through a Regeneration Act.
Thanks, Yanni. Certainly nothing specific that's been identified through the work that we've done or through the conversations that we've had with Council. Notwithstanding that, the Council does have a number of work programs underway in the Port Hills area. And if there were any issues or obstacles that were identified, as we've indicated in the advice that we've provided, Regenerate Christchurch does remain available to assist, but through the preliminary work that we've done to date, we have not identified anything that we would propose using the powers under the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act for.
Mark, do you just want to add what we're doing with the residential unit over there?
Yeah, so one of the first plan changes to the Christchurch District Plan is to amend or remove hazard overlays that currently apply to 80 properties across 5 or 6 geographic areas. That reflects a change in the risk profile for those properties. The plan change, we have gone through a submissions period, and the submissions received are in support, and we're expecting to complete that process within 6 months or thereabouts, which is comparable to another process under the GCRA.
Sorry, just around the Port Hill stuff, just sitting in my mind, just kind of recent events in New Zealand and whether there's going to be any sort of re-evaluation of risk appetite and tolerance. I know it's very early days to be raising that, but you know.
Sorry, that's not to do with this paper.
Well, yes, it is actually. The Port Hills red zone, the risk profile is absolutely part of this.
No, sorry, this is about the advice on the residential red zone in terms of the utilisation of the legislation. So that is not to do, what you're raising now is a separate issue which the council's got under control. All right, so I'll open the resolution up for debate. No debate. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Jan.